What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of SpeedSim. I'm eHouse.
I'm Andre.
And today we're going to talk about a topic that gets a lot of airtime nowadays in the real firearms community. And we're actually going to talk about how it kind of applies to airsoft, because there are actually a few different considerations for airsoft, I think, than real firearms especially. So what are we talking about?
We're talking about the pros and cons versus using iron sights and red dots, either mounted directly on your slide of your pistol or frame mounted, or using iron sights in general.
Yeah, so it's about the sighting systems that you would use on your handgun.
Yeah.
Now, handguns in the real firearms market, more and more people are starting to use something like the Trijicon RMR.
Mm-hmm.
Some people even use the T1.
Yep.
Often slide mounted on their real firearms handguns, because now red dots are getting to the point where they can handle handgun recoil and the rigors of being carried every day.
Yeah.
Now, more of that is starting to make its way to airsoft. I mean, for example, there's a PTS Unity Unity Tactical Atom slide with a clone RMR on here. Andre has a real Seymour sight mounted onto, who the heck makes that mount?
This is made by 5KU, which I do not recommend. But I got this frame used from somebody else, and this was what I had. I've been looking at different mounts, but this one specifically is the 5KU, the carbon fiber black version.
Okay. So there's a couple different ways to mount a red dot to your handgun for airsoft, and they have different pros and cons. Now, one of the big things I want to mention right off the bat is between slide mounting and frame mounting. One of the biggest considerations is going to be holsters, because if you
that'd be one of the considerations. There's another consideration after you finish with that. I'll let people know.
Yes, absolutely. But one of for me, because my handgun is a secondary, for me, one of the big considerations is, well, how am I going to carry the thing? Now, a lot of the slide-mounted red dots will fit into a lot of holsters. Many holsters on the market have enough clearance for something like this RMR, because, well, the holster, frankly, doesn't go up in cover where that goes. And especially if you get a custom Kydex holster or something like the Blackhawk Omnivore, any of the more modern holsters will usually have some kind of consideration for that, versus with a frame-mounted handgun or a frame-mounted red dot, you'll often need a really special custom holster or a speed holster like that's meant for IPSC, or you'll need something like the new Surefire holster that clips directly onto a light, but those are really expensive, and then you need to have a light that'll work with that holster. So it's a whole different set of things that you have to navigate when you have a frame-mounted red dot. But there are other advantages to consider and disadvantages. And then, of course, with iron sights, you get to skip all that entirely. It's just like, well, if the holster fits the gun, it'll fit your gun.
Yeah.
So
another thing that to kind of consider when you are making a red dot choice, and specifically, is for airsoft, I mean, when you are thinking about putting an RMR on your slide, you need to have the recoil spring be able to navigate that slide, that red dot, because it is heavy and you're putting more weight on that slide. So when you are making that decision versus a frame mounted one, you need to have the recoil spring to back up that red dot you're slapping on your slide. So you got to make that as consideration too. You can do the short stroking, which is the easiest way, or you can bump up to a 150% spring. That would be your max. I wouldn't push it past it. I know e-bike has the 175 and a plus springs. Do not do those. You're just going to ruin it. You're going to actually be using more gas than you want to. So keep it between 150 and below, and you'll be fine. And if you have like the UAC 125s, just put in a short stroking kit, and it'll do it just fine. But it is going to significantly hinder your cyclic rate.
that is actually a really good point. So yeah, gas efficiency and cyclic rate will likely suffer with this, just because it's not a real firearm.
Right.
On a real firearm, having that red dot on the slide, 9mm is probably going to cycle that slide just fine with or without the relatively light RMR on there. But for airsoft, that is a unique consideration.
Yeah, very.
And that's one of the big pros of frame-mounted red dots.
Yep. With frame-mounted, you can leave everything the way you have it already. From, like, let's say you have a stock TM, you can just leave it the way it is, slap that frame-mounted red dot on, and you'll be fine. You don't have to do anything. So that is a great advantage that frame-mounted has. A disadvantage would be, like Eric said, holsters. You're going to have to buy either a really cheapy speed holster, or you kind of do custom, which kind of gets expensive. So you can go either way. So unless Eric, like he said, it isn't your primary, then it's going to be a really hard sell to put on a frame-mounted red dot if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, and then one of the other problems, well, unique considerations for airsoft. Now, for real firearms, you would never even consider this, just because you're probably throwing this optic on at least a $500 or $600 gun.
Yeah.
So having, a $400 or $500 optic on your $500 or $600 real firearm that you want ready for self-defense is not as bad. For airsoft, this whole setup is probably like $300 or $400 maybe, yep. And it's an airsoft gun. So do I really want to have this in a BB Wars environment where it could get shot out and have a real RMR on here?
Mm-hmm.
So now real RMRs are really good optics, but for an airsoft environment where optics get shot out, where you might drop this, where you're going to be running and sliding around a lot, it's one of those things where can you justify throwing $400 maybe into a quality RMR or some other kind of equivalent optic to go on an airsoft gun? Personally, I find that very difficult. So I got a replica RMR, and this is where I'm going to come right out and say most, if not pretty much all replica RMRs and replica handgun slide mount ready optics are pretty much garbage. They're really bad. The one I have right now is from
Ace One Arms.
Yes, Ace One Arms. You have a better memory than I do. It's from Ace One Arms. It's okay. It works for the most part, but it's definitely not a high quality red dot. Unlike the other ones I've bought, it zeros and it actually has different brightness levels. So congratulations on them for achieving a basic level of functionality. But all the other ones I bought were, for one reason or another, just total garbage. And that's the other thing too, is because these are lower quality optics, they're not going to have the battery life that a real optic is going to have. So if you're putting this on your hip for a game as your secondary, and let's say you're going out to an American Milsim game, you're going to be out in the field for 8 hours. So you need to have a fresh battery probably in this before the game starts to make sure that it's going to stay on for all 8 hours at a consistent level of brightness, because most of these, you don't know what the battery life on them is, and it's probably not very impressive. I've had multiple replica red dots that I would estimate their battery life be 50 to 100 hours maybe, which as far as red dots go is pretty pitiful considering the real T1 gets about 50,000 hours. So it's something to consider, that your battery life is not going to be as good. The quality of the optic is not going to be as good if you get an airsoft replica. If you get a real one, props on you. I just can't justify that because, like I said, I've had optics get shot out, and it sucks enough when it's like $100 optic. It would suck even worse if it was a $400 or $500 optic. Whereas when you frame mount, you have a wider variety of optics you can choose from.
You have a lot of different choices. Like we've mentioned in a previous video, I have a real Seymour sight on here, as well as I have another pistol in my collection that has a replica T1 from B2 or Bravo, if many of you guys might know it, and I had that mounted on there. So the level of, like Eric said, quality is totally different. By far the Seymour is by the best functioning red dot for my pistol so far. As far as the Bravo one, it's actually pretty good for what it was. At the time when I bought it, it was $100. Well,
tube style red dots, the replica market has been much kinder to.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm trying to say is, different red dots for frame mounted, you have a lot more options. You can slap a Seymour on there. I know Evike has the cheapy element ones for, I want to say like $60, which work pretty good. You get a lot of cool accessories with it. You can also put on a T1, or if you want to go real old school, you can put the old school Aimpoint Q3s on there if you want to go real far back.
That's a throwback. 80s competition shooting right there.
If you really want to take it all the way back, I mean, I don't know what you're into, but for the most part, I would stick with reflex sights on your pistols because you have a wider angle of view, and if you need to adjust anything on the fly, you can with the reflex sights versus a tube style, because you can have more of a narrow kind of pathway. And again, we've mentioned this in a previous video as well.
Another thing with airsoft guns and optics is, so this is not a uniquely airsoft concern. This is for real firearms as well. However, I feel like it applies so much in airsoft because so many people cheap out on their holsters, or so many people are just way too rough and tumble. When you drop your gun, if you play indoor CQB, or if you're playing on a concrete environment and you drop this thing on the optic, odds are good you're breaking it.
Yeah.
So unlike if you're running a bare, nice iron sight pistol, you still might break something if you drop it, but you're not going to be shattering an optic, which is something you have to consider if you are, throwing this into a holster. So maybe don't use that $29 Condor universal nylon holster with your, $200 or $300 gun with your $100 optic on it.
Yeah, those are, like you said, those are something you got to be careful of when you're making your purchase decision as far as holsters go, because you don't want that shit breaking, especially if you have like a really nice tricked out like high capital, like something like this, which costs you like $600 or $700. You don't want to be dropping that, especially in the dirt if you don't clean it.
Yep. I actually recommend like either a good quality Kydex or some kind of level 2 active retention holster for most airsofters.
If you're really like on a budget, the Valkyns are decent enough
until they start spinning.
Besides the they're decent enough. They have that at least level 2 retention where it clips onto the trigger guard and it holds it there secure if you buy it for the correct pistols, unlike me.
Yeah, or you could get the Black Hawk Omnivore if you want to run T1, or even if you just have a frame with a rail on it. Then I've had really good luck with that. Any number of the Kydex holsters, just something quality and good, because you don't want to be stuffing this investment, really. I mean, it's it's
an investment.
Yeah, it's a cheaper optic, but it's still like $80 to $100 or whatever you're paying for it. So, you gotta be careful and make sure that you're protecting your equipment.
Right. Now, moving along to the iron sight sides of things, you have a little bit more options as far as that goes. When you are looking at different iron sights, for me personally, I like running a fiber optic front and fiber optic rears because it helps me narrow in where I can see where the BB is supposed to go. And I prefer using iron sights more than I do red dots. With the exception of the Seymour, I can use it. It's actually very easy to use. But for the most part, I really like my iron sights just because I have that whole point of view. I can see everything for where I need to. And if I need to make small adjustment, it's not that hard as far like for a red dot. When I'm looking down the sights and I can see the BB go off stray a little bit, it's kind of harder to kind of narrow in that BB with a red dot. Not incredibly hard. It's easy, but for the most part, the iron sights is so much easier because you can just dial it up and down on the fly. As with the red dot, it kind of takes a couple seconds here or there. Not impossible, just again, when you are making your decisions on that. And as far as like equipment goes, you can buy the AIP ones, which are about $30, and you can slap them on there. They're direct mounts, and you don't have to do any sort of fitment on them, and they drop right on. You can also get the Ken's Props one. They're about $12 for the rear, and I want to say $5 for the front, and they're all fiber optic. He only has them for 1.5 millimeter fiber optics. So if you're looking to get those, you got to get the correct fiber optic sizing for his 3D printed front and rears, but you can drill them out to make them 2.0 if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I actually prefer iron sights usually on my handguns as well, just because, again, like I said, it's a reliability thing for me because it is a secondary. Now, I do like certain things about red dots, but for simplicity and reliability, you really can't beat iron sights. Especially, I run a front fiber optic front and a blacked out rear. Talked about that in another video, why that is. And it still works great. But red dots do have a couple of advantages. For example, they're really easy to acquire after you get your practice with them.
Yes, you need to practice a whole lot.
You do, because the challenge is, so with a slide-mounted red dot, you're often going to want to acquire that front sight, and then you'll be able to find where the dot is.
Yep.
So you spend less time chasing the dot kind of on a slide-mounted red dot, because you have a point of reference for where it should be roughly with your front sight, and then you punch that out, and you're able to acquire it. Now you'll see me actually closing my left eye when I'm doing that. It's because I'm left eye dominant actually. When I actually have the dot on, it's a little bit easier, but it's still something that I kind of struggle with because of my unique visual situation. Whereas Andre, with the frame-mounted red dot, you don't have quite as much a point of reference for
really
acquisition.
The way that the red dot sits, it sits higher above the front iron sight, so you don't have a reference point at all. So when you are making your when you're looking for your target acquisition, you really have to know where that dot's going to sit, and this takes about a month to 2 months to actually figure out exactly how you have it set up, because it takes forever to figure out how you have it set up. So you really got to punch out every day. I would sit in your room and just punch out and just find your dot. I find it a lot easier with the reflex sights like the Seymours or your NC Stars or any other reflex sights out there versus a tube style like T1s or Aimpoint Q3 if you want to go way back. It's a lot less of a challenge for as reflex goes as far or tube style. So you do have to learn those ones on frame mounting because you have no reference point like Eric said on his slide mounted one.
But the thing is, once you do learn it, because there's a learning curve.
Yeah, there is a learning curve.
Once you learn it, if you have it zeroed, that dot is where your BB's going.
Yes.
It's not like iron sights, where iron sights you've got that margin of error with where the light is between each of the between the front blade and the rear sight, and then you got to make sure your elevation is on. Now, if you're practiced with iron sights, those things aren't that big of a deal, but it is faster to get a clear sight picture with the dot because where that dot is where your BB's going.
Exactly.
So it does make shooting a bit easier when it is working properly and when you do have practice with it. So that's why, despite all the other considerations we've put on here, you would want to consider a red dot because, frankly, once you learn it, it's really darn easy and really darn handy.
It's a lot of fun because the dot is going to go exactly where you want it with a little bit of a variance because if you're running green gas,
it is Airsoft still.
It's like Airsoft, but your BB will drop sometimes or go off to the left because it's Airsoft. It's a round ball.
But I'd say within like 50 feet, so general CQB distance, it will still work.
Yep.
Also, for low light shooting, I don't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but for low light shooting, the red dot is always going to be visible.
Yes.
Now, if you have blacked out iron sights and you're not running a light, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, you can't see anything.
Yeah.
If you can, I haven't seen these in the market for a while now, but they do make Trigicon style iron sights with two.
Yeah, with the tritium, right?
Yeah,
glow in the dark.
So they do make glow in the dark sights. Haven't seen in the market for a long time, but they do make them. If you find them, you're going to be in luck. If you don't like running flashlights, it's CQB environments that are dark, which wouldn't make a lot of sense if you run that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, a pistol mount flashlight is pretty awesome.
Yeah, especially if you play indoors a lot. And it's dark for the most part.
Yep.
All right, so if you guys enjoyed this video and it was helpful to you, leave a comment down below or leave us a like rating. Thanks for watching. This has been SpeedSim. My name is Andre.
And I'm Ehouse.
And thanks for watching, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.
Peace.